Hi, David.
Hi, Karat.
Next question. Are there any obvious gaps in the risk management process?
Yes, sadly, I think there are. We talked about using 6 or 7 questions as a basis for the risk management process. So those are, what am I trying to do? Objective setting. What might affect me? Risk identification.
Yes.
Which are the big ones? Prioritization.
Yes.
What could I do? Response planning. Implementation, and then did it work?
Yeah.
The risk review. Who shall I tell? Risk reporting. And then keeping it up to date. What's changed? And so there's a standard risk process, and you'll find that implemented or reflected in the official descriptions of risk processes, whether it's in the ISO 31000 standard or in project risk management processes or operational risk or financial risk. It follows the same kind of approach. And so we would have something like plan the process, identify the risks, risk assessment, response planning and monitoring and review.
Yeah.
What's missing very often is the step which we talked about in the last question, which is the most important step. There's nothing in most processes for implementing risk responses.
That's right.
So you go through, identify the risks, assess the risks, plan the responses, monitor. And what do we do between planning, responses and monitoring? Well, we're supposed to do the responses, but there's nothing in the risk process. And so there's a kind of assumption that because you've planned it, well, obviously you're going to do it. And the difficulty is that risk management is often seen as an optional extra, an extra activity separate from the real work. So I'm busy with my real work of running a business or of managing a project or of doing whatever it is I do. And then I have to do this risk thing over here and I write the risk register. But there's no connection between the risk process and the real work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I have time, I might do these risk responses. But actually, if we don't implement the risk responses, as we said, then the risk doesn't get managed. So I think it's a real omission, a real gap in the risk process to have a formal step called implement risk responses. Now, one of the professional bodies, one of the standards, has started to make a change in that area. And that is the Project Management Institute approach for project risk management. And just in September 2017, they released the latest version of their guide to how to manage projects. And that has a chapter on risk management, which I was responsible for updating. So not surprisingly, I plugged the gap. And with the agreement of my colleagues in the Project Management Institute, we added in a step.
Okay.
So it says, blah, 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 plan risk responses, new process, implement risk responses, monitor and review.
Okay.
And I think that is a clearly missing step normally. If it happens without a process step, that's fine. But I think it's safest to put a process step in there which just reminds people you really do need to do this. Otherwise, nothing changes. So that's one. The second is it's really important that we don't make the same mistakes twice. That if we miss a threat and it turns into a problem, or if we miss an opportunity and there's a benefit which we lose, that we don't do the same thing next time that risk comes along. So learning lessons is really, really important. And often the risk process starts at the beginning of our initiative, whether it's a strategic planning cycle or a project or an entrepreneurial launch, a product launch or something. Yeah. We start the risk process, we do it once and we stop. And we don't, when we finish, we move on to the next thing, the next 5-year planning cycle or the next project or the next product. And we fail to learn the lessons of our experience from the first event, the first implementation.
That's right. Yeah.
So having a formal risk lessons learned review, I think, is really important. So we ran through it and we said, so what happened? And then we record generic risks that could affect us next time, responses that worked. We actually record these things and we learn the lesson next time round. So I would say often that's missing from the process as well, the implementation of responses and the learning of lessons. And I think those are two obvious gaps in the risk process, which could be plugged quite easily. But at the moment, most of the implementations of risk management that you see don't have a formal response implementation step, and they don't have a formal capturing lessons step. And I think that's a big mistake.
It's true, David. That's true. It led me to a thought where I personally think as a risk practitioner, I think that most people also, in addition to the gaps that you've mentioned, they forget to look at current and future data while managing a risk
Yes.
in a process or in a project or in a portfolio, etc.
Yes.
They just get too hung up on historical facts, empirical facts. What do you
Yes.
think about that?
Yes, we're going to talk later on about risk identification techniques. And I think that's where that focus comes in. If we always and only look in the past, we learn the lessons from the past, but we don't see what's different in the future. There's a saying in the defense world that generals are always fighting the last battle. So what happens is, we had a battle, we went to war, and there was a particular enemy, and these tactics worked, and these weapons worked.
Right.
So now we have a new enemy and a new battle, so we take the same tactics and the same weapons and we apply them, and it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So, we can't use old technology or old tactics to manage new threats in war.
Yes.
The same is true, of course, in business and in finance and in projects and in our personal lives. Every situation is new. And so risk management, I think, is really, my view, it's a forward-looking radar. It scans the future.
Absolutely.
It says what's out there and what's coming my way.
Yes.
Some of those things are bad and I need to move away from them. Some of those things on my risk radar are good and I need to move towards them, but it's forward-focused.
Absolutely.
There's also a rear-view mirror that says what's behind me and how did I get here, and I need to learn from that. And really, risk management has that double focus, looking behind and learning the lessons of how I got to this point, but scanning the future to see what might be coming and positioning myself proactively for that.
Very well put, very well. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.